September 19th, 2019 meeting of the Woodbridge Township Board of Education will please come to order. Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Here.
Ms. Bourdain?
Here.
Mr. Delapietro?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Molnar?
Here.
Mr. Velez?
Here.
And Mr. Treebwasser.
Here. Mr. Secretary, as required by the Sunshine Law, please read the notice of meetings.
Thank you, Mr. President. The New Jersey Open Public Meetings Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend meetings of which any business affecting their interest is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with the provisions of this Act, the Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be published by having the date, time, and place thereof posted as follows. January 4th, 2019, emailed to the Home News Tribune, the Star Ledger, and the Municipal Clerk's Office posted it. Posted in the Avenel Middle School and the Board of Administration. No, sorry. Hang on. No, I'm good. We finished.
I'm going to have the attorney read it, Mr. Wolfman.
Thank you.
New Jersey Open Public Meetings Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend the meetings of the public bodies in which any business affecting their interests is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with the provisions of this Act, the Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be published by having the date, time, and place thereof posted as follows. January 4th, it was emailed to the Home News Tribune, Star Ledger, and the Municipal Clerk's Office, posted at Avenel Middle School and the Board of Education Administration Building.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney. Mr. Delapietro, if you could please read the closed session statement.
Thank you, Mr. President. In compliance with the Sunshine Law, the Board must go into closed session in order to discuss subjects exempted from the public portion of our meeting. The discussions to be held in closed session will be regarding personnel matters. Additionally, the Board will discuss the WTSAA agreement. Lastly, the Board will receive attorney-client advice regarding the Board of Education ethics and the Woodbridge Middle School. Any information regarding the closed session discussion will be released to the public when the reasons for discussing these matters in closed session no longer exist.
I have a motion by Mr. Delapietro. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Molnar. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. We'll return as soon as closed session is ended. Please rise for a salute to the flag and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do I have a motion to reconvene?
So motion?
Motion by Mr. Molnar. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Anderson. All in favor?
Aye.
Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Here.
Ms. Bourdain?
Here.
Mr. Delapietro?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Molnar?
Here.
Mr. Sedana?
Here.
Mr. Tamburello?
Here.
Mr. Velez?
Here.
Mr. Treebwasser.
Here. Will someone make a motion to approve the minutes of the previous meetings?
So motion?
I have a motion by Mr. Sedana. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Velez. Are there any additions or corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
Carried. Mr. Secretary, please state for the record any notice of bids received by the board.
Mr. President, there are no bids to report this time.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Dr. Zaga, please give us an overview of the graduation profile for the 2018-2019 school year.
Mr. President, last June, between our three high schools, we graduated 1,069 students. 84% of them entered college, and we're proud to report that 30% entered the military. Not 30%, 30 students entered the military.
Thank you, Dr. Zaga. Dr. Zaga, please state for the record the superintendent's report for the month of August 2019.
Mr. President, I have the following reports, the reports of the attendance officers.
Thank you, Dr. Zaga. Superintendent's agenda, Dr. Zaga.
Mr. President, I have 20 items to present to the board.
Do I have a motion on the superintendent's agenda?
So motion?
I have a motion by Mr. Molnar. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Delapietro. Any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar?
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello? Yes. Mr. Velez?
Yes.
And Mr. Treebwasser.
Yes. Policy and Planning agenda, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Policy and Planning Committee, on recommendation of the
Superintendent of Schools presents the following 10 items. I move the adoption of the foregoing.
I have a motion by Mr. Harris. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Anderson. Any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar.
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Curriculum, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Treebwasser. The Curriculum Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, present the following 11 items. I move the adoption of the foregoing.
I have a motion by Mr. Harris. Do I have a second?
So motion. Second, sorry.
Second by Mr. Sedana. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public?
David Pinkwitz, Island. I'm just asking, as you're doing the presentation, will there be an opportunity to comment after the presentation? Because my comments are relative to the presentation you're now adopting to do.
You can do it during public comment if you like, Mr. Pinkowitz,
Okay, I mean, or I could comment right now.
if you like.
All right, so I reviewed, and I know you'll present this in a couple minutes, the NJSLA report. Some of the numbers are hard to really judge one way or the other because, the state goes up, we go up similarly. There is one number, though, that seemed a little concerning, which was about geometry. So when we get to Algebra 1, which is a required class, for every student to graduate is supposed to have algebra and geometry unless there's some reason, that they can't take those, typically with probably some kind of plan. So in the case of algebra, we have similar results. We have results that are fairly in the 30s in terms of level 4, for meeting expectations, exceeding expectations about 10%, let's say, just a little under. But then in geometry, there's like a big decline. And I guess my question is, because I don't see anything on this agenda about it, has there been any specifically looking into geometry separate from all the other subjects in mathematics to look into seeing what we can do to improve that? Because obviously most students that graduate the high school, and Dr. Zay didn't break it down 100% in his graduation report, but obviously anyone that's not on a portfolio plan or some other means of graduating had to take geometry, had to take algebra. We have this decline in performance. Are we doing anything about it?
Dr. Zaga?
Yes, Mr. President, Mr. Pinkwitz, first point, the students do have to take, even if they do a portfolio, they still have to take geometry. There's still a geometry requirement. The portfolio fulfills their test requirement. So there's a test requirement, plus there are course requirements and credit requirements. The reason for geometry being low is, as you probably are aware, the state still hasn't made any of the PARC exams or NJSLA now exams graduation requirements. So our high school students figure that out, and if you look at the numbers of the students who took the test, you see far fewer students taking the Algebra Geometry 2 because those students realize that they don't have to pass the PARC test to graduate if they have already done well on the SAT or PSAT or one of the others.
And that may be true, but I could see that across all the math scores that are at the high school level.
Right.
Yet geometry seemed far lower than the others relative to each other, not necessarily comparing it to grades 1 through 8 or 1 through 7, since 8th grade has its own separate issues because of algebra.
Right. So many of our 8th grade honor students take the Algebra 1 in 8th grade. So the scores tend to be higher. Grades 3 to 8 right now, the students are still compelled to take the test. But when they get to high school, they realize that you can actually, at this point, satisfy your graduation requirements in 9th grade by getting a score in the PSAT. So those students realize, they can opt out of the PARC, take the morning off, maybe sleep a little bit later, and it doesn't hurt them. And we, as much as we encourage them to take tests, you know, they realize at that point that they don't have to. It really doesn't count toward anything, doesn't benefit them.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Mr. Bader,
Mr. Trebwasser.
your presentation.
Yes, I have a presentation. It's, we have a 19-page document this year. People can access it on a link at home, and those who are in the audience may get a hard copy. This 19-page document is very detailed in laying out our PARC and NJSLA results over the last 5 years. And in this document also demonstrates subgroup comparisons, comparison to state changes, as well as district trends over time. Generally speaking, the scores are very similar to state scores. For the most part, we show below average scores in language arts compared to the state, and in many cases, slightly above average scores in mathematics. Some notable, I think, trends specific to how we have done over the last several years. The district has demonstrated growth in percent of students meeting and exceeding expectations in 5 out of 8 categories from 2017 to 2019 in language arts. The district has demonstrated growth in percent of students meeting and exceeding expectations in 8 out of 9 categories from 2017 to 2019 in mathematics. When you look at subgroups, the district has demonstrated growth in all subgroups in percent of students meeting and exceeding expectations from 2015 to 2019 in language arts. And the district has demonstrated growth in all subgroups except the category of multiple in percent of students meeting or exceeding expectations from 2015 to 2019 in mathematics. That being said, we are not where we want to be or need to be in our state testing data. And we have really come together as a district and gotten feedback, input from all stakeholders in putting together a list of interventions that we think will help everyone pull that rope in the same direction to improve test scores. This is, if you think about it, the back of our baseball card. This is the data that represents the good things that are going on in our school district, and we want that to be reflective of the hard work that happens on a daily basis in Woodbridge Township schools. So a few of the highlights of the interventions that we will be implementing this year, very big. We have teacher access to Linkit data. So we will be using a digital platform called Linkit, which is correlated to the rigor and content of the New Jersey Student Learning Standards. We will be asking teachers this year in grades 2 through 8 to write at least one of their student growth objectives specific to the data that they see on the pretest Linkit, which was already given this year, which we call Form A. So that assessment in language arts and math will give every 2nd to 8th grade teacher specific data on where each student in their class is in regards to being proficient on every standard in language arts and math that the state requires. And following that up, teachers will be implementing 3 more assessments: Form B, right before winter break, Form C, before spring break, and Form A again in June. And each time a teacher gives that assessment, they will be looking back at the results, comparing to the previous test and seeing if the action steps that they put into place are working. Do they need to have a different plan? Do they need to bring in another person? Do they need to maybe make more contact at home, utilize another teacher, look at some other different things that we have in the curriculum to reinforce what the teachers need to learn in a very engaging way. So basically, it gives the teachers actionable data throughout the year linked to the New Jersey Student Learning Standards. We will be using the computer teacher at the elementary level to work with the classroom teachers in grades 2 through 5 to look at this data with the classroom teacher
and utilize some prescribed IXL practice, which is an online digital program that allows students to build on skills in New Jersey student learning standards. The several schools that we have who have been identified in need of improvement because of lower testing scores, they have been using additional money from the state to have extended school day, additional staffing, and supplemental professional development and technology. We will continue because of the obvious necessary component of daily attendance. Last year, we promoted attendance greatly. This year, we will continue to do that with a new attendance policy, which utilizes only the excused absences that the state defines. Last year, just on running some incentive programs and talking about attendance more and the importance of attendance, we reduced our chronic absenteeism across the district from 12.2% 2 years ago to 9.6% last year. And I am very hopeful that this continued talk and the continued use of attendance programs and incentives will hammer home the need for students to attend school every day, because when they leave us, we want them to be successful in college and career, and in both of those places, daily attendance will be required. We will be utilizing the supervisors to lead talks about the New Jersey student learning standards in all of our elementary and middle schools. They will be discussing the newest instructional units that have been released by the state, as well as the New Jersey Department of Education digital item library, which are examples of rigorous test questions that are available to the public. We have strategically placed the district supervisors who have obviously their specialty areas in schools that would benefit the most from their specialty area. We have asked that and actually mandated that all principals test in the latest possible testing window. The state gives you several weeks to actually give the state exam at the end of the year. We want the principals to administer the test at the very end, thus giving more instructional time to the teachers and more practice for the students. We want to reduce off-task time in the classroom. Each school has been required to do a detailed annual school plan where this principal, working with data teams, will be identifying weaknesses in each school that they need to work on. All PDPs, SGOs, and administrator goals, once again, are aligned to improving scores and to assist and continue to ensure that all subgroups are improving and are learning. We will be participating in equity training at the state level, and we'll be participating in the College Board all-in AP program, which ensures that the cross-section of students that we have all participate in rigorous coursework. I am hopeful, and the data shows we are moving in the right direction, and I'm confident that working together we will continue to move in that direction.
Thank you, Mr. Bader.
Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Delapetro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar?
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Finance and Insurance Agenda, Mr. Tamburello.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Finance and Insurance Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Business Administrator Board Secretary, presents the following 8 items. This evening, I move for the adoption of the foregoing 8 items.
I have a motion by Mr. Tamburello. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second by Mr. Delapetro. Any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public?
Good evening, Tom Maris, Fords, New Jersey. Just making a comparison, I happen to have with me the Finance and Insurance Report from June 27th of this year. I'm sorry, yeah, this year. And I'm looking through what we're seeing tonight, the September 19th presentation. Just a couple of questions. The point number 1, that the Board of Education approves payment of bills in the amount of $20,353,783.84. If I look at the June, our billing at that time, our expenses were $14,986,760.03. That's quite a substantial jump, about roughly a little over $5 million. Can you explain how much or why that's gone up?
No, Mr. Maris, I can't, but I will make sure that you get that answer.
Okay. I'm assuming the other questions I'm going to have may require a delayed response, and I fully appreciate that. I know you're not prepared for all of this, but again, we've gone up. I see just to get this into the record, the capital projects in June were $2,056,000. I'm just going to round it at that. And this month's report shows that we're at $9,272,000. Again, that's a substantial jump. We're looking at what, close to $7 million. Can you explain that? What capital projects have raised it up by $7 million?
I can't tell you what projects have taken place. Again, we can get you that information, but capital project outlays are laid out ahead of time. So I'm sure if you went and did your due diligence, as you always do, you would see those projects that were awarded in previous agendas. I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but I'm sure that they can supply that for you out of the business office.
Okay. In looking at point number 2 in the September 19th presentation on the finance and insurance report, it says here that the requisition for taxes for the general fund in the amount of $15,295,343, and for the debt service of $430,163. And I know I've spoken to the debt service before. That's a monthly amount that we have to pay to carry the burden on our debt, and obviously it's a substantial amount. My question is, why do you have to turn to the town council to get the money out of the general fund? That wasn't shown when we've done prior reports, as I said in the June report, but here we're asking monies to come by approval of the town council. Why is that?
You're asking why were we requesting from town's council the tax monies to be set aside?
Yeah.
As far as I know, that's the standard process.
Okay.
But it sounds like the list of questions you have that are all financially related, I think if you pass them on to Mr. Wolferman, he will get you all your answers as he always does.
Okay, but the purpose of having this discussion right now is it's an open forum, and I know I can, and that's the reason I'm asking the questions in an open forum. What I'm asking, what I'm getting at, let me just cut to the quick, is the township holding our tax money and accruing the interest on it, rather than the school board holding the money and accruing interest. And then you go to them to draw down what you need, but are you getting any benefit out of the interest that they're getting on the funds?
Mr. Maris, I believe the way that we do it is the way that it is required by state statute and law. I don't know what those laws are, again, off the top of my head, but certainly that we wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't legal.
Oh, I didn't say it wasn't legal. I'm just wondering if that is the best way to protect the interest of the school board, which is a separate taxing entity. And that's why I'm looking at it and asking about it.
I don't believe there's another way. If you're aware of one, please let us know and we'll certainly look into it.
Well, it's the first time I've looked at it, and I'll certainly do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President?
Yes, sir, Mr. Aaron.
I just wanted to speak to the point number 2 about the school board requesting money from the township. The township does all the taxing. We request that money from the town. The town collects all the money, and then they send the portion of our revenue. So that's why it comes from the town. It's just an item number 1. I know we're going to respond to Mr. Maris' questions. I just would think it stands to reason that the capital project bills are higher this month than they were in June, is because we do a lot of capital projects over the summer when the students are not in the buildings. And recently, School 11 was recently completed and delivered to us. Our students were able to start the school year on time in School 11. So I would suspect those are the numbers, just for clarification to the public that's sitting here tonight and reviewing the video. I know we'll provide those detailed and accurate pieces of information to Mr. Maris, just in the event that that's not cleared up at the next school board meeting. That's very much what I suspect those bills are, and I think I saw some nodding heads from the administration there. Over the summer is when we do a tremendous amount of work. I know Mr. Treebosser will be highlighting that, particularly some of the work that was done at School 18. I see some of our School 18 parents here this evening. We got a lot of capital improvements projects done over the summer at School 18. So That's what I suspect number one is related to. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Roll call, Mr. Secretary?
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar.
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Buildings and Grounds agenda, Mr. Mulnar.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Buildings and Grounds Committee, on the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Business Administrator Board Secretary, presents the following. Tonight, I'll be moving items 1 through 7.
I have a motion by Mr. Molnar. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Delapietro. Any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar.
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Transportation agenda, Mr. Velez.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Transportation Committee, on the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Business Administrator Board Secretary, present the following 9 items.
I have a motion by Mr. Velez. Do I have a second?
Second?
Second by Ms. Anderson. Any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar.
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Personnel agenda, Mr. Molnar.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Personnel Committee, on the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, presents the following. Tonight, I'll be moving 32 items.
I have a motion by Mr. Molnar. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Sedana. Any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar.
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
I abstain on the item 16 in the name of Valerie Henderson. Yes on all other items. Negotiations agenda, Mr. Velez.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Board of Education's Committee for Negotiations with the WTSAA present the following 1 item. I move for adoption of the foregoing.
I have a motion by Mr. Velez. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Sedana. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Are there any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Mr. President, I'll be abstaining on the negotiations agenda under the name Frank Delapietro.
Mr. Harris?
Thank you. I will be abstaining on the negotiations agenda under the name Daniel Harris.
Mr. Molnar.
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
And Mr. Treebwasser?
I abstain in the name of Jonathan Treebwasser on the negotiations agenda. Mr. Bush, do you have any recommendations this evening?
None at this time, sir.
Is there any old business that should be brought before the attention of the board? Any new business to be brought before the attention of the board?
Mr. Board President,
Yes, sir, Mr. Tamburello.
I would like to invite the community out to our annual Italian flag raising ceremony at Town Hall, October 14th at 10 a.m. And equally important, I would like to congratulate our Board Vice President, Frank Delapietro, on being this year's honoree as Italian American Man of the Year. So congratulations. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Tamburello. Mr. Harris.
Sure, yes, it's sort of old business. I wanted to highlight this. I mentioned this back in the spring. The County Board of Freeholders was paying for 2 traffic lights to be added in Woodbridge Township, one at Lake Avenue and Lancaster Avenue. That's since been completed. But more notable to our school district is the proposed traffic light to be added at Delaware Avenue and Inman Avenue in Colonia. Freeholder Charlie Kenny recently gave me an update, and he told me that it was part of a larger package of transportation projects. It's been gummed up in the works, if you will, and they have since are pulling that project out. So the Delaware Avenue traffic light will be pulled out and voted separately, and that should be awarded at the next freeholder meeting in October. So that's an important. Maybe it will gum up the traffic a little bit on Inman Avenue, but I think it will provide for a safer egress for motorists leaving Delaware Avenue, where our Colonial Middle School, one of our larger of our 5 middle schools, is located. It'll provide for a safer exit and entrance for our middle school parents and school buses dropping off and picking up their students. So I want to thank the County Board of Freeholders for getting that project done. And last but not least, I am one of the co-organizers of the Colonia Cleanup. If there are any parents or teachers out there, your students are looking for community service hours, the Colonia Cleanup is scheduled for Saturday, October the 5th, beginning at 9 a.m. and lasting until about noon or 1 p.m. That's located at the Charlie Shaughnessy Park, located at the intersection in Colonia of Amherst Avenue and Inman Avenue. So that's a great volunteer opportunity, and again, to earn community service hours, either for your regular schooling or perhaps for your churches or religious obligations. So we welcome people of all ages. Adults are welcome to join us as well. So again, that's Saturday, October the 5th.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. In keeping with my past practice.
Mr. President,
I'm sorry.
we got one,
We got a couple others.
memo. Any residents interested in becoming a school crossing guard with the Woodbridge Police Department? We have some anticipated openings. It's a part-time position. I'm told the pay is good, and if you'd be interested in that, you could go to our personnel department, 1 Main Street, and get an application. And there's also more information on our webpage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Velez.
Mr. President?
Ms.
if I
Bourdain.
may, There is a seminar, Raising Happier Kids. They did this last year. Last year was a 4-part series. It is held at the Island Middle School. This one is Thursday, September 26, 2019. The topic is the tech generation, raising balanced kids in a hyper-connected world. Every speaker that I saw last year was incredible. I walked away with a wealth of information on how to help my child both at home and get through social anxieties at school. I suggest that you come out and try to make these seminars. They're important for our families, and it's a free event. They ask that you RSVP. The flyer will be put on the website, so you can take a look at the website for the important information. But it's September 26th, Thursday night, at the Island Middle School in the cafeteria area. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bourdain. Anybody else? Oh, Mr. Sedano.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to invite the community at large on October 4th at 6:30 p.m. about it's information about the dangers of vaping and e-cigarettes. It's a health concern. It's something that has to do with the health and well-being of our student community. Again, it's on October 4th, 6:30 p.m. at Island Middle School. I would urge as many parents and students and community members to come out and attend the information session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sedano. Anybody else? Okay, so in keeping with my past practice, I'm going to give an update on the projects that are going on in the district. But before I started, there was something that I was made aware of the other day, and I thought it was actually absolutely worth mentioning. The RISE program has formed a partnership with Retro Fitness that is going to provide training for our special needs students. And what's really great about it is after they help them to develop a lifelong, hopefully, practice of exercise and proper eating, they're going to offer them a discounted rate if they want to stay with the program, which I think is great. And the other thing they're going to do to help the students to be able to transition to being more independent is they are installing a kitchen at the RISE building, which will give the students an opportunity to learn how to fend for themselves. Before I get started, I just want to say that our goal is to move the board meetings over to Woodbridge at School 11. As soon as that's ready, it needs a few more details taken care of so that it can support the board meetings. And as soon as that's done, we'll try and give between 2 and 3 weeks notice so that everybody is aware, and we will make sure that we do a solid job of advertising so nobody is left out. As far as our construction projects go, our Woodbridge HVAC project, the preliminary work was done over the summer. The rest would hopefully be completed next summer, and the boilers and all will be in place. School 28, the exterior masonry work continues after dismissal. A few more weeks of that is left. The playground should be done in approximately 2 more weeks. School 11, Phase 1 is complete. The punch list items are being addressed, and the opening went as smooth as could be expected for the beginning of school, and even smoother considering it was a brand new building. The School 11 demo, the permits have been issued. It's going to be taken down the week of November so that we are not to negatively impact the students in any way, shape, or form, and that should eliminate a lot of the distractions for the class during the day. Phase 2 will begin as soon as that is done. The time frame is approximately 10 months. Hopefully, it's done September 2020. Woodbridge Construction. The administration met with the construction company and the architect. They are confident that they will be done for the October 30th time frame, which was the 8 weeks that they promised us. And then the phase 2 will be several months complete after that. Woodbridge Middle School relocation has been going very well. There were some transportation issues, but they were very minor, considering the fact that we were transporting an additional 520 kids roughly a day, twice a day. Mr. Sinelli and his team and the administration did an outstanding job in coordinating that and making sure that it got executed correctly. School 18 ceiling replacements are completed. The exterior drain is completed. The locker replacements are scheduled for the summer of 2020. The lockers didn't get done this year just because of the money we spent on the other items, and also the fact that we didn't want to disrupt anything in the classrooms, and that's why we're waiting until the summer. The Woodbridge High School track replacement is underway, should be ready for the spring season. Colonia High School's tennis courts replacement is underway, and they should be ready for the spring season. School 14's main entrance has been moved to the rear of the building so visitors can walk up the stairs and go directly to the main office without walking through the hallways. The Colonia High School front entrance, the archway, had repairs done, and they are completed. There was an air quality issue at School 23. Tests were ran, and nothing was found to be of problem. There was a gas issue at School 11 at Colonia High School. No students were in danger, and the issues were resolved before anybody went back into the building. There was a new HVAC system installed at the Rise building, or is being installed at the Rise building, and that should be underway and completed in time for the heating season. And that's basically it. In keeping with our past practice, we will open this portion of the meeting for statements from the public. If you wish to say something, please come to the microphone, provide your name and your area of the township where you reside for the record. Please limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes in accordance with Regulation 1100D. Also, if you have any questions, I will not answer them until you are done with your 5-minute time frame, if that's indeed the amount of time you need.
Good evening. My name is Lauren Parrott, and I live in Island. I have 2 kids in Island Middle School and 1 child who just entered JFK High School. I did walk in with only 2 things to talk about, and after listening to the park testing results, I wound up having a couple other things to say, so I'll try and make this as quick as possible. 2 of my kids wound up with an amazing teacher in 3rd grade who went, "I know you're all nervous about the park test. Don't think about the park test. Focus on me, focus on what we're doing. I will give you the keys, and you're all going to do great." She got them all multiplication licenses to where they still to this day can rattle off their multiplication tables better than I can. One of my children did not get her. They got a teacher that went, "We have to focus on park. Test, test, test. We have to focus on park." She cannot make it past the 5 tables to this day in 8th grade. That holds a child back in math. I just implore you all that as you're guiding teachers on the test, there's a difference between teachers becoming so focused on the test versus teaching them the knowledge they need that will ultimately give them the keys to succeed. As far as hearing about wanting students in the classrooms as often as possible, I would presume that this is why my middle school students no longer get pulled out for band. I think that is a shame because my kids never had a problem keeping up on work. I know any student that did usually wasn't allowed to attend band pullouts to begin with. Music is something that unlocks parts of the brain that just reading a textbook cannot. And kids missing out on their band lesson for an entire half of the year does put them behind there. And I can say since my kids picked up musical instruments, their grades all did improve vastly. And I do see a difference when they don't have their pullouts for the half of the year. I've been talking to other people who live in different townships who also operate on block scheduling, and the way they have their lunch system set up is far superior. The high school kids get an hour for lunch in the middle of the day, as opposed to the half hour that our high school kids get. And right now I have an 8th grader who has to leave gym class from the field, go eat lunch within a half an hour. She buys lunch, which means it's more like 20, 15 minutes, so scarf down lunch, and then is expected and graded on running pacers. I can't do that, and if any of you can do that, my hat would be off to you. I think we're shortchanging our kids, and I would like it if we could look at a different way to do lunches. It's really something, in my opinion, the district, as far as my understanding is, has been doing this since 1999, so that's 20 years. So to get an improvement, that's going to let our children be more successful and not run down. Also, there is data that does show that kids that get a longer lunch break in the middle of the day, even if it extends the school day by 20 minutes, they perform better. They have a moment to relax. They're not quite at the workforce yet, and I don't think we should be driving them to move that quickly. My final and last point is my husband explained to me the best he could, so it's spotty information, that the JFK Marching Band is having a hard time moving around their supplies for competitions due to lack of getting a truck or something to move it around, and I would like the board to reconsider getting that to them for what they need, just because it's a great extracurricular activity that a lot of kids in the community are a part of. It keeps them out of trouble, it keeps them away from vaping behind buildings, and I'd hate to see them not get to attend as many competitions simply because they don't have the ability to move their equipment. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay. If I could just, a couple of points you brought up. Hopefully the philosophy of the district and the teachers is that we teach the children a robust enough curriculum that they're able to do well on the test, as you explained with that first teacher. I don't think there's anyone who sits up here that advocates teaching, saying this is on the park test, so this is all we're going to teach. We want to teach them a broad enough curriculum so that they all understand it. With that being said, we have to make sure that what we do teach them enables them to be able to perform well on these tests, because no matter how much we like it or don't like it, it's a standard measurement, and unfortunately, the district, the students, and everybody in the state of New Jersey gets evaluated on how they do on these tests. So we do recognize that. In New York, it's the Regents exam, and pretty much every state has their own formal state exam. So I certainly trust that Dr. Zaga and the rest of the administration, it works vigilantly to make sure that what you described is, if it is happening, and I don't doubt your word, that it is being reduced dramatically every year, and hopefully at some point we no longer have anybody who says you have to only worry about the test. You have to worry about learning, you have to worry about becoming efficient at, as you used as the multiplication tables as your example. The kids should be able to rattle them off to the 12s, by the time they're out of third grade or second grade. So I appreciate that, and we all recognize that, the importance of that. You said the band was a situation. Is it just that it's not started, or were you told that they are not doing band in Island Middle School?
They do not participate in band pullouts. It was something that they had done for years when my oldest had first started, first 2 years there. It's when they don't have band as a class period, as one of their electives, once a week they get a pullout from another class to attend a lesson. And that stopped last year.
Dr. Zaga is going to look into that.
Okay, thank you.
The unit lunch. There are a lot of districts that use unit lunch. Some of them are very successful. Some of them are not successful. One of the benefits of unit lunch is to give the students an opportunity to do labs, to get extra help, to do their clubs and all those types of things. In some schools, it's worked very, very well. In other schools, what they find is that the kids have an hour to kill and socialize, and they really aren't getting any more academic benefit out of it. They're not getting the additional assistance that they're looking for. My 3 kids went through the school. I wasn't aware of any of them having to have gym, go to have lunch, and then go back out and have gym again.
Every 8th grader at Island Middle School has to leave their 4th block in the middle of class to get to gym, which means that even if they're in the middle of a math lesson, they need to stop. And then I use gym because that's what my oldest is having to go through right now. My middle child is going through right now. But I could also see for English or math how that disrupts the lesson and kind of defeats the purpose of a block scheduling.
But so are they going out? Maybe I misunderstood. So they're getting pulled out of class. They're going to do their lunch. They're getting pulled out for gym. Then they go to lunch, and then they go back to gym?
Yes. And are expected to perform and graded on their performance for such things as the mile and the pacer.
I'm certain that will get addressed.
Thank you very much.
There was one other thing. Oh, the truck. The truck that the district has, from what I understand, is pretty much on its last leg, and they've been borrowing one from the municipality. And the last event that I believe JFK had, they were able to borrow the truck for that, and they have 3 events total in a year, and they've made arrangements to use that vehicle so they can move the props, I guess they are, for their events.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, ma'am.
David Pinkwitz, Island. I just have two items. I'll follow up briefly. First, a follow-up on the middle school band. I had heard that they had stopped pull-out in the band. This week, I had requested a copy of the instrumental music curriculum guide. And the board and the administration wisely, back in 2015, when they last adopted these standards, stated there were two things. One, their students are scheduled for weekly lessons, either on a stationary or rotating basis. So there's some flexibility there. It doesn't say it has to be pull out necessarily the same period like we have in the past, but it does require weekly lessons in this curriculum. And then second, there's band rehearsals scheduled weekly, which my understanding is still happening, but those are two kind of separate things. One's the band rehearsal as a group, the other is the lessons. So I know this board adopted this curriculum at the behest of the administration, so I would certainly ask you to look into it, and if pullout is not happening, if there are no lessons happening during half a year for these students, that it be corrected. Right. The second item I wanted to talk about real briefly was I had planned to talk about this anyway, but I saw the state, I think back in maybe about a month ago, was piloting changing start times for high schools. And I don't know how they're picking the districts to do that. I know they said they were going to pick districts in different sizes, different backgrounds. I think it was coming from one of our state senators was one of the sponsors of this. We try to do a lot of different things. This district has done things from giving every kid a device in high school and 8th grade, various changes to curriculum, various pilot programs we see almost every month on the agenda. This is one thing that for the districts that have tried it around the country, it seems to have worked incredibly well, which is to change, and what people may not know what I'm talking about, is the idea that high school kids of the age of high school, let's say 14 to 18, tend to sleep later. Biologically, they just, as a group, not every individual, obviously nothing is about every individual, they tend to sleep later. And we all know that our elementary kids, they're the ones that, will be getting you out of bed before you're ready to do anything with them, but they don't go to school until 9 o'clock. And I think the traditional reason we've done it, obviously we break up, for busing reasons, we break up all the different school start times. And then separate from that, high school has things like after-school sports or other after-school activities, and so people like to get it done so they could travel to wherever they're going. I just would encourage the district, if they were accepting volunteers, to consider it. Even if they're not accepting volunteers, I think it's something that could work very well in the district, especially in a district like ours where we have 3 high schools that play each other in many sports, so some of the scheduling issues that other people might run into wouldn't happen as much in this district, given that at least 2 of the games in every sport are probably played against one of our in-town rivals. So anyway, there's studies of this. I'm not going to repeat all the statistics, but that basically it helps kids, first of all, learn better because they get more sleep. Because the reality is they stay up late because they don't feel compelled to go to bed. But it doesn't change. Changing the start time doesn't mean they go another 2 hours later or another hour later. They still go the same time, but they get extra time to sleep. There's fewer accidents for those that are of driving age. There's a lot of benefits. And obviously, it probably means swapping elementary with high school. That might, in one respect, it might help parents in the morning who have work for the elementary kids. Obviously, it means a later time or earlier time, so they would have to deal with, care issues after school. But they have to do that, most people, anyway. So anyway, I just encourage the board to look into that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. John Rotary, Woodbridge. Boy, I'm glad I came tonight. It's for last 2 months or so, we're going to town hall downtown. And before that was always talking about the schools, projects being done, good things being done, but all of a sudden last 2 months they don't talk about it. Just said, be careful when you drive the kids on the street, so to speaking. The way I heard tonight, everything going smooth with the schools, and I'm really, really glad what's happening. But again, there's a couple of things that my question would be, there's some concern about it, from one school, the kids go to 3 different schools. Now, what happened to kids, they have some kind of a mental or what do you call disability or medical disability, and you got one nurse in one school. How do you cover those students that need some extra help? That would be one question. And then second, there would be, how many more students attending the Woodbridge schools this year compared to last year? Anybody know? And the third or fourth thing would be, I see that a junior high school there in Woodbridge, on Barron Avenue, there's those white tents over there that are number 8 grade, 7th grade, 6th grade. Are they owned by the school or they rented from somebody? And who are the people that we rented from? If we rented, who are they from? The rentals. I guess that's about it, but I'm really I'm glad I came here. Looks things are going smooth. And again, there must be something really good happen from those kids go to those schools. I was in Germany 3 years ago. My daughter was in Germany, and my grandson went to kindergarten, 1st grade in Berlin, JFK School, United States John F. Kennedy School. And over there, they had one school with all 12th grade, including kindergarten. And I said, how would they do it? So I did go to school. They was in January already. And I went there and I see how they work it. Of course, the discipline in school is unbelievable. You think, how do the little kids get along with the high school kids? Of course, each grade teacher, whoever else was with the kids of their own, 1st grade, 2nd, whatever it is. And believe me, I think that a lot of those little kids, they want to be what you call somebody bigger, but they made them feel good. They be with all the kids in the school. But most important, what I find out, to go to the JFK school, people who come on bicycles in January to bring the kids to school because they want to go to the school because it's one of the best schools around, I get it. But again, transportation. If you got kids at different grades, different schools, you got to take them here, there. This way, if they will bring all the kids, whatever, to one school. As long as they made it school, because they did have extra, you have to be qualified, so to speak, to get in the school. You just didn't take anybody. But that's what's important. I think it's a great pilot program or something, maybe just going, unfortunately it did happen, but I think maybe it's good that those kids have a chance to see how the kids, 6th graders, 7th graders, 8th graders, which they could be next year, the year after go there. I think it's probably one of the, positive things going to happen from that. So in the future, I think maybe we should not have all those different schools. We could have one big school that could have multiple grades instead of in junior high school, elementary schools, everything like this. And that's, it's busy. So that's it.
Mr. Vitaric,
Yes.
the question about the nurse.
Right.
Every school has a nurse in it.
I know.
If there was a problem with it, where they needed additional medical assistance, they would call 911 and they would have a rig dispatched to the school.
Well, the way I was told that actually they know what kids need in those schools. The kids need, if you're in junior high school,
Right.
The nurse would know what kid needs what. Like what kind of food, what kind of this and that. That's what we're talking about. So if you got what happened to those nurses that were in junior high school in Woodbridge? What happened to the nurse? Where is she? She can go to 3 different schools at one time, can she?
We allocated the resources appropriately for the need of the students in the different schools.
And just a silly question, what happened to the principals and the vice presidents of those schools?
Are you these additional questions? Because
Yeah,
you
please.
said you were done, so I started
Well, I
answering.
just
So
kind
if you
of-
have more questions, I'm happy to wait.
No, that's okay, that's it.
So the last question was the administration of the school?
Yeah, the
question?
principal, vice principals.
Okay. So the nurses are allocated as needed based on what the students' needs are, and we really don't discuss individual students. We're up to 13,700 students, so we're probably up, about 100 students from last year. The tents were acquired through the quote process in accordance with state and federal standards as far as bidding goes. So as long as it's under the bid threshold, then Mr. Wolfman would have gotten 3 quotes by a responsible quote person. As far as having one school, I can't imagine the size of a school with 13,700 students. I think we'd call that a university or a college. As far as the administration goes, The principal and his vice principal and other administrative qualified people in his school are being allocated to check in on the different schools to make sure that the teachers and the staff have the support that they need to execute their curriculum and students' day every day.
Thank you. May I ask who did win the contract? Who won the contract? You said who's the company or the person that got a contract on the tents?
I don't know.
You don't know,
I don't know.
but you approved it.
But you keep asking me, you keep telling me you're done, and then you keep asking me new questions.
No, it's
So
not a question.
I don't
You didn't-
know who it is.
You didn't answer my question.
I did.
You just said four
You asked-
bids
you asked me how
on
it's
it, but
done.
I asked you who were the
I can't tell
people.
you who was awarded the quote. You can certainly open that, and they can provide
Thank
you
you,
that.
thank you.
Good evening, Tom Maris, Swartz, New Jersey. Just take a couple of minutes to kind of shout out for a couple of late. One, I'd certainly like to, and she left, the mom that was here for bringing her concerns to the board. And your response, I think, was very appropriate. But it's nice to see parents come down and talk about things that are really the nuts and bolts, the reason we're all here, and that's the concern about the children. And that was remarkable. I wish more parents would come out, and I'm sure you do too, and express those kinds of things so you do know what's going on and what the pulse is. I'd like to also thank Mr. Bader for an excellent presentation. I do have one question in that, and obviously it could be a topic that could take up quite a bit of time in discussing, but in the presentation there is one page that lists the students, as it gives you the breakdown into gender, male, female, and also ethnic groups. Within that, is that defined into what that change is? In other words, see if I can phrase this the right way. How many are male? How many are female? And the reason I'm asking that is, as you were saying, it's a real problem today in educating children, and I certainly respect the efforts that you're making and looking at mechanisms to make a teacher's lives easier, because they certainly do work their tails off trying to educate children, but also for the children themselves. There's so many distractions, so any tools that you can employ that are going to be a help. But I was just curious about whether in the Asian community, how many are male, female, black, Hispanic, and so on, if you break that down. The next thing I had was to, again, congratulate the board and Dr. Zaga, Mr. Wolferman, on the Herculean efforts to get those schools built and opened on time. I know that there's still things that need to be done, but I'd also like to thank all of the teachers and the staff that endure the changes, including the students. It's kind of rough on them. It's very disruptive, and I think most people don't realize how disruptive that is. And again, with about 30 some odd years in the construction industry, I know how hard it is to bring projects in on time and on budget. It is very, very difficult. And kudos for being able to do that. Aside from that, did I have anything else? One little thing occurred to me. I happen to use the Crunch gym over by Woodbridge High School, which I happen to like a lot. It's helped me quite a bit. That and a good diet. But one of the things I notice is a lot of times I'm coming out, and it's also the high school is letting out. And perhaps Lieutenant Velez might relate to this, because he just talked about school crossing guards, although there it tends to be that we have our uniformed police directing the students as they're coming out. And it made me stop and think of, and I'm trying to squeeze this in with the time allowed, so I'll be as pithy as I can. When I lived in Japan, I happened to be walking with my wife at the time downtown, and Fridays and Saturdays were the holidays over there. And we were walking down, and traffic was closed in a very big part of the Tokyo area. There was no vehicular traffic. Pedestrians were all over the place. And we came up across the crosswalk that was controlled by a traffic device. In other words, you can walk or you can't walk. Since we saw no one, there's no traffic, we walked across it. And it didn't take long before a young man or a guard came over screaming at us. We couldn't figure out why, so we got somebody to come over and interpret. And what we had done was to set a bad example for the kids walking around. Because even though there was no traffic, they still wanted them to understand that that traffic light was to be obeyed. And I thought about it, and I said, gee, that's kind of ridiculous. There's no traffic, what are you worried about? And then the more I thought about it, it serves a great purpose. It shows people that they have to be responsible and respect things and learn. Which brings me to what I saw at the school, and I've seen this many, many times, is that our police control, if you will, or the school crossing guards, whoever they may be, are teaching the kids to walk across, and they're stopping the oncoming traffic. In other words, traffic coming has a green light, but they have to stop, and the kids are allowed to then walk across. And I'm saying, well, what kind of training is that? You're teaching them to violate the very thing we want them to honor, and that's when it says, don't walk, and yet we're telling them to do it. So it's kind of metaphoric, but I'm just thinking maybe we should say, we want you to learn, obey the rules, but let's enforce them ourselves. And it's just a little tongue-in-cheek, but thank you very much.
Good evening. Dan Grossberg, Island. Appreciate the updates on School 18. I mean, it's obvious why I came. Just had a question about the indoor air quality tests and when they're expected to resume. And as a follow-on to that, when they do resume, are they going to be taken while kids are in school in the classrooms? Just looking at the website, I noticed the last results that were up there were from June, when all the kids were outside during a field day. Thank you.
I explained that at the previous board meeting. That was a scheduling issue. We had a new principal, and we didn't change the schedule. That's been changed, rectified with the company. The only tests that are going to be done when the students are in the classroom would be a CO2 test, something like that. They would not do a mold test while the kids are in the room. But I expect we'll continue with a similar schedule. I don't know if it'll be as frequent since we've had no negative results. Hopefully at some point we're hoping not to have to do tests there on a regular basis, that everything is complete and satisfied and the children are in a very safe environment. We believe we're already there now. We may give it another round, but that's not too much longer.
Great. You said, do you think it's this month that they're going to start testing again?
I don't know. I'm sure if you check with Mr. Wolferman, he'll be able to tell you any foregoing sequence of tests that are scheduled.
Okay. Thank you.
Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So motion?
I have a motion by Mr. Molnar. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Bourdain. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Meeting adjourned.